call the meeting to order. It's 5:37, and we'll begin actually with citizen comments if there are any. Natalie, did you get any in advance at all?
No, but
point of order, Chair. Sorry, this is Dan. We have to do a voice roll call because we're on Zoom.
A roll call for what, Dan?
To come to order.
Okay. Yeah, we hadn't done that before. No. It was a roll call for votes. I'm not aware of a roll call for starting a meeting. Is there something new?
I could be
exciting?
We've never done that on Zoom.
That's how the city does it every time, but maybe that's a city rule.
They did advise that we make sure that everybody who's participating is able to hear and see everybody else. So if anybody's having any issues, you know, I can see everyone just fine. And then there's Dan Coyne's backyard. So is anybody having any connectivity issues? Or if everything's fine, if you want to raise your hand and we can just establish that everybody's able to see and hear me and do that. Okay, so yeah, I'm seeing everybody except for Dan. And then if anybody has any background noise, if you want to mute yourselves just so we can minimize the background noise. Not that there's an issue at the moment, but it's kind of nice to just have people on mute as the default. So, so as I said, we were opening up for citizen comment if there were any, and I do see that we have a few call-in people. And then Natalie, I'm sorry, I was in the process of asking you if you got any citizen comments in advance.
I didn't, but if anybody wants to type into the chat, they can at this time, but I didn't get anything before today.
Okay. So we'll just give it a second there if anyone wants to type into the chat.
I'd like to say something. I just would like it noted that I find it really distracting to have all of us here and Dan walking in his backyard and stuff. It's just really distracting. Don't even know if he's listening.
Thank you, Debbie, for saying that. I think that people can also, you know, of course, choose to turn video off if I have been in meetings where that's actually, you know, advised. Just so
that's much better, I think. He should just turn the video off.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how many times I can reiterate what was issued by the governor as the recommendations that people actively engage in these meetings as though they were in a room with each other the way we used to be. So I've kind of said all of that. I don't know really what else to say about that. I appreciate everyone who's, you know, participating actively and being on camera just so we can see each other and know. I mean, technology is not the ideal way to do this, but you know, if we're going to do it this way, it's nice to be able to see everybody's faces. I do agree that it's distracting. So there's no citizen comment. It seems like we'll move on. And of course, this meeting is about Dr. Effiam's report on the racial equity assessment that she has been working on for, I think, about 7 months. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Effiam, and we will hear from her.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's kind of hard for me to believe that we are 7 months down the line from when we first really gathered. But I think we've accomplished some significant work in that time, and I'd like to start by going over where we started, how we started, and where we've come to, and then help the group decide where we want to go next. So as you all remember, by the time that I came onto the scene, there was a group that had formed called Ridgeville United that had some concerns about racism in the parks and in the park district. What we were what we agreed to do in partnership, that means myself and RPD, was to first of all assess the organization. Let's do an organizational assessment and see if any of these things exist, if they exist, how they exist, and where they exist. And then we wanted to so to create that assessment and then to implement that, which we have done, and I'll get to that eventually. And then we were going to, at the same time, do some staff training so that the group, the totality of the group, particularly the board members at that, well, it was the board members at that time, had an understanding of these terms that were loosely being used in board meetings, terms that can be fully loaded, like racism and inequity, and they're fully loaded, but well, how did that apply to Ridgeville? And then we wanted to really take an overall look at the organization itself. So I'll tell you how I went about doing that was initially, yes, I did develop, and there is a survey that is currently out there, racial equity survey, which is on the Ridgeville Park District equity website. So that is out there, but more importantly was to sit with Ridgeville's partners and stakeholders, neighbors and friends, and people who had concerns, and to sit with them and to hear what their concerns were. So we ultimately ended up speaking with 242 people, some in small groups as little as 3, and then some just as individuals. Where we sat with them to know what they knew about Ridgeville, what their experience at Ridgeville had been like. Had they been to Ridgeville? Did they know the staff at Ridgeville? So each session took about 20 minutes to speak with a variety of people. As I expected would happen, the lists that Ridgeville provided to me were friends and neighbors of Ridgeville, stakeholders, partners, collaborators. As I talked to them and asked them to make recommendations for other people I needed to speak with, that broadened that group. What was clearly missing, and we talked about this going into it, was the Black voice. We knew that we probably had very little contact with the Black community, and so therefore we would have to go to them and find them. And then, so that's exactly what I did based on the demographics of the people that I had interviewed. Then I specifically went to Black meetings, Black organizations, Black church leaders, and sought out their advice. As again was expected, there were very few who had much interaction with Ridgeville. Those who particularly live and are older in their 60s and 70s and live in Evanston have very rarely as children been allowed to go outside of that area, and so knew their home territory, but not much outside of that. Some of them had heard of a group called Ridgeville United, but seemed to think that it was the Park District itself. So wasn't quite sure what it was, but had some interaction with them. After talking with various people, that did help to shape what we wanted to ask in this survey. If you remember, we started out, we wanted to do 2 town hall meetings that we were hoping to get 200 to 300 people at each one. And then we were also hoping to do some small focus groups. And then with COVID-19, that did not make that possible to hold those groups. I still do believe that ultimately those are things that should be built into a regular and ongoing strategic plan, is to listen to the community, to hear what the community has said. And as we get further down into some of the further recommendations, depending on where you all decide to go with equity, it would certainly behoove you to hold these smaller groups on even a more regular basis. So we developed this instrument, we got it out there. At the same time, the board, as we were getting into it, we recognized that a piece we had not considered was this board training and a READY committee, the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, that would drive this work to here. So that when we got to this point, you all would have enough information to know if this is the kind of work that Ridgeville, number one, had the capacity to do, had the willingness to do, had the ability to do, and certainly whether you wanted to finance it. And so in order to do that, I thought it was only fair that you all understand what this body of work is like, meaning what does it mean to be a racist organization or an anti-racist organization? What does it mean to try to become an equitable organization? What does it mean to hear concerns and charges from a community and how to adequately respond to that? So we built in two trainings, one for 6 hours and one for 10 hours. The original plan was for the board to take 6 hours of training and the Ready Committee to take 10 hours of training. I must say I was pleasantly surprised, well, somewhat frustrated by the Opens Meeting Act, which did not allow us just to convene as a body, one body, and do some of the training. But on the other end of that, it turned out that was really wonderful, because it took what can be difficult conversation and it broke it down into small groups, just three of us in a group together, talking about issues that could be sensitive or may not be sensitive, but allowed each of us some time to explore what we felt and what we thought. And so I was very pleasantly surprised at the interaction and was somewhat disappointed when we moved to the larger group, which was just as enriching. But the conversation across the board was deeply rich and meaningful. And I do believe, as the consultant walking away from it, I do believe that this group now fully understands, as much as you can to this extent, now fully understands what it means to get into racial equity work. I believe that the group understands that this is, it's a long haul journey. Racial equity work will eventually get us to diversity, but it is not diversity work. The diversity work is about bringing in numbers of people that look, sound, listen different than we do. The equity work has created an environment that allows those differences to exist. And so immediately early on, some of the feedback I heard was, well, there's an all-white board. Yeah, there is an all-white board. And there's very little control that any of us have over that. Because it is an elected position, that's just the way it is. And certainly we can do things to help people to come forward who want to run and support them, but ultimately the vote comes and the vote goes. In thinking about the Ready Committee, again, some comments, well, we need more diverse, specifically we need more Black people. And we need, first, that's true if we have Black people that want to contribute and have the time to contribute. We don't want Black people just because they're Black. But more than that, we recognize that should this group continue on as a body, that's part of the whole goal, is to do some recruitment to help other people understand what it means to make a commitment to equity work. And that's where we will grow in that sense. It is my opinion that we need to, with the Ready Committee, if you decide to formalize this group and move forward with this committee, that we also need, the Ready Committee should develop some training that would help those who are coming behind them understand what it would mean to be a part of a body of work. And what an honor it is to be a part of that work. So that's where we started. Any questions up until here? Okay. So what I found in general, very broad generalities, is number one, in looking at the community itself. I spent quite a bit of time before COVID walking your building, taking pictures of pictures that were hanging on the wall, where those pictures were located, and they were pictures of different things. Some of them were photographs, some of them were pieces of art, some of them were sayings. Some of them were tacked to the wall, some of them were stapled to the wall, some of them were laminated, but all the literature that you had posted around the building, including going into the bathroom and looking at your bathroom space. Took all that, copies of all that, and sent that out to two focus groups, one Black and one white, and had them give feedback on what they saw or did not see. In addition to that, I was able to get out to the parks. The downside to the parks was by this time it was post-COVID, and so there were very few people out there. So if anything, I could see park and I could see green space, but could not see much else. I can see what I didn't see, Again, some of the obvious things that, it didn't say no loitering, no sleeping. I didn't see anything that was unwelcoming. I just did not know how welcoming they were. It felt very welcoming to me because they were open, they were green, they were beautiful, and I could sit wherever I wanted while I was out there. So I had a chance to look at that. I've had a chance to attend all of your board meetings and watch how you all interact with one another, with issues that come up that could be inequitable, not just black-white issues. So to sit through your board meetings and watch and listen, and also to hear, sort of discern where you all are coming from as a board in terms of funding and thinking through funding, and thinking through what you want your future to look like. COVID provided a real good fodder for good information as the group talked about, okay, how can we be helpful to the most needy? Could we put together packets and deliver those packets? You certainly got involved with the feeding program every day and made sure to make contact with residents that were coming that way. I heard you talk about, can we give money to families? So there was lots of thinking about ways that we could be inclusive in different kind of ways. So as you can see, often it's the informal that gives much more information than the formal that gives information. Initially, I started out when I first met, once we signed with the board and I started out, I met with Natalie and Dan and Martha, and that was sort of to set the framework for what this body of work would look like that we were going to do over the next several months. And our goal was to establish a clear understanding of the scope of our engagement. And they were going to provide those names as they did, and then provide whatever other additional support that I might need. And so that's where we're at now. So another thing that we did was our understanding that the code, the ordinance, your law has some things in there that are particularly problematic for Black and Brown people, and that they needed to be looked at in depth. And those things be taken out, stricken, overturned, whatever that language might be. And you'll see in your packet, there is, I believe it's a 2-page addendum. We did a very in-depth, step-by-step, line-by-line letter, even questioning things like, yes, picnic. And while there's some outdated language, there really is nothing there that is evident or evidence of a racist organization. For example, I think if I could remember, there was some language about panhandling, and someone thought that could be problematic. Is that inappropriate language to be using in this day and age? We tried to take it back to the simplest common denominator. What is the dictionary definition of a panhandler or a picnic? And to Google possibly any terms looking for any negativity, and that just doesn't rise to that level. I do recommend, as part of my final set of recommendations to you all, that over the next 3 to 5 years, that you would certainly want to look at your ordinance and clean up the language a little bit. And as always, there's room for, if you happen to have a board of racist individuals, anything could be found to use against someone. But that just does not exist here. The other question that came up was the number of times that the police were called, particularly on Black males, particularly around the issue of basketball and basketball courts and late night playing hours and the issue of barbecuing. And so we went back in police records to 2020 to pull piles and piles of documentation on the police stops that were made at your parks. And again, there's just not a body there that suggests a pattern of anything. And so oftentimes officers were not dispatched, but rather officers have the ability, as they're doing their rounds, to sit in a particular area and kind of watch the area. They may pull up in front of St. Francis. I happen to have one that pulls up all the time in front of our Jewel Osco and sits for an hour or so and then moves on. You did have some of that, but never once was there a police stop made, and nor were there a reference made to the fact that they thought there might be some kind of activity going on in that area during particular times. There was, I know that it was about 12 years ago that there was a basketball rim taken out, a half court rim that was taken out. I had not realized quite how long ago that was. And I know that I'm not even sure of all the circumstances surrounding that, but I know that that issue has been discussed, and I couldn't find in the police records any such incidents as that or any police calls regarding that. A couple of police calls I did find, actually two that probably did call out the police twice in one night, was because of an alderman who called out the police. For two different reasons on that same night. And so there was that in there. Having taken all of those things into consideration, the final thing that we did, we felt it was really important to get our messaging out. Part of all the noise around whether Ridgeville was racist and whether the board members were racist and whether was that our story wasn't out there. And so we took the information we had and through our trainings built a set of definitions about defining how RPD would define equity, how we're defining racism, so that we're all working with the same terms. And so we do have out, as I said, out on the tab an equity website that explains the work that we're doing. It is meant to be continually added on to. I believe that Natalie has started even adding particular readings that people might find interesting if they want to know more about certain things. We will certainly have a frequently asked questions, but it also, like as I said, it lays out some of the work that we're doing. And so that is, that's my report as it stands there. Based on that report, the two decisions that I ask you tonight that need to be made for you all tonight, and number one is that is the board interested in continuing the work of equity, diversity, inclusion as a priority for the upcoming year? Now, knowing now what you knew 7 months ago, is it your commitment to continue this work as a priority for the upcoming 21 year? And once, think about that, because I think you're gonna have to, I know you're gonna have to vote on that. And then in order, no one has asked me this, but in order for me to stay as your consultant, I would also need you to identify and formally appoint that REDI committee, that they become formal, that the board votes on and gives them their proper authority to become a body that recommends to the board. That without that board, without that internal support, I do not believe that the board work can go forward. Now, that does not mean that I have to be the consultant. It just simply means you have to have that internal body who's ready to go and to do the work, to work with a consultant to get you where you want to go. If you vote, depending on how you vote on both of those issues, there are then a second set of recommendations about where we go from here. So I'll turn it back over to Martha to help answer those questions. And certainly if there are any comments or questions, please ask.
Okay, so as the agenda notes, we would transition at this point into approving of the recommendations that you've made by vote. And I guess when I look at the report, what you've given us verbally seems to end now with point number 2 of 2 when it comes to the first set of recommendations. But then, of course, there's 1 through 11, which are, further recommendations. I don't know if you have a better way to describe
Yes.
that
So,
section.
yeah, so in case assuming that the questions pass tonight, that you all decide to move forward with this work, the board had asked me early on to explore with you all what are some of the additional pieces I could work with you on. And that is a list of those additional pieces that we could work on as a committee. If someone's saying, well, sure, I'd like to go on, but what does that mean for us? That would be what that looks like. And we would flesh it out a little bit more, but those are some of those bullet points.
Okay, so it sounds like 1 and 2 is what we would ideally make some movement on tonight. The first 1 and 2, that is, and then 1 through 11 is look into the future as to what next steps would be.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so I think just in terms of us, receiving this report from you in writing and then receiving it verbally from you just now, I think we should kind of go over any questions or issues or anything as a first step, and then basically vote on those first 2 recommendations. I think is where we could go. So let's just start with sort of some feedback, questions, etc. I saw your hand first, Matt. I don't know if anyone else had a hand up before you, but you've got the floor.
Thank you. I was just thinking procedurally, could I make a motion to receive the report from Dr. Effiam? And once we seconded that, we could open it for discussion and then as a board vote to receive the report. And then next steps are 1 and 2 on the 11-point list.
Yeah. Well,
I don't see any issue with that. I guess I'm a little confused with the voting to receive. It's sort of like exactly what does that mean? We've already received it. It's really the accepting of the recommendations and our move to agree with her and take action in those regards. So
Sure. I'm just saying, if you were looking back, if you were just reviewing the minutes, just reviewing the timeline 2 years from now, see the report, you'd see that the board received the report, you'd see future action going forward.
okay, so I mean, I think what you're saying is a good idea because it is in accordance with the wording that's on the agenda. I'm just, I don't see any problem with it. I think it's just a little bit confusing because I think the action piece is that we are officially voting on agreeing with her recommendations, that we nominate the committee officially moving forward, and that we are in fact, going to focus on equity into the next budget year. That's 1 and 2 from her. So yes, I mean, whatever that motion is that you want to make, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Sure, I was making it 3 steps instead of 2.
Okay, and you know what? Speaking of minutes, we don't have Julie here you're doing minutes. Okay. So yeah, then for Natalie's sake, since she's taking the minutes, if you want to just reiterate the 3 steps you had just said.
Sure. So the first step, I would move to accept the report from Dr. Effiam.
This is Coyne. I second.
So we'll do a roll call, and I guess, Natalie, would you mind doing the roll call for us? Julie normally does that, just to vote on that motion.
Sure. Commissioner Braun?
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne?
Yes.
Commissioner Gaines?
Yes.
Commissioner McCord? Pat, you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Mitchell?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I hope with Zoom, they for our purposes, I hope they develop, you can just wave your hand and the mute turns off so that people don't have to step to their screens. Okay, so, again, I think it's more of a formality than something that makes sense in real life that we vote to receive, because of course we have already received it and we're very thankful to receive it. And then Matt, did you want to go to a second motion then?
Sure, I would make a second motion to make a commitment to continue funding of equity work for the 2021 budget.
I'll second that.
And Natalie, do you mind?
Madam Chair, will you repeat what you said?
Me?
Yeah.
I move that the board continues funding equity work in the 2021 budget.
A point of order, Chair. This is Coyne. I think our attorney advised us on Zoom meetings. Whoever is making a motion or a second or voting, they need to not only say it, but they need to identify. So I do believe we did get a motion from Mitchell and a second from Braun.
Well, you can see us.
That is actually the procedure we were following, Commissioner Coyne. We were basically saying, this is Mitchell, I'm making the motion. So, and I think technically we are supposed to do that just in the case that there's any issues with people being able to see who's talking. I think that's what we're providing for, which probably isn't an issue, but it's just the best policy to be clear. So yes, from now on, and that's helpful for the minutes too. If everybody can just announce themselves. That's the whole point of the roll call, actually, which of course Natalie would be saying our name. So do we need to redo that? Or I think we have that, right? Just moving forward, if motions and seconds, if you can say who you are.
Commissioner Braun? You're on mute.
So actually, I'm sorry. So with a motion and a second, we can discuss at this point instead of going straight to a vote, right?
Can we discuss it?
Yeah. So I would like to, did you want to go ahead and did you want to say something, Matt?
Sure. I intentionally left the wording vague in the motion. As of right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rosinski, but there's $14,000 tentatively set aside in the budget for equity work.
That is correct.
Right. So I personally am willing to, I think that's a good investment. I think it's a good amount. I'm not willing to firmly vote on that tonight because I think it's going to end up in our budget vote. But I am willing to commit to substantively funding equity work in our 2021 budget. That's all I have to say.
Any other discussion, questions, issues on this motion? Okay, so I wanted to just say that on one hand, I absolutely want to fund equity work for the future year and, and beyond. But that in itself is a very vague statement. And I would also add as a major qualifier to, funding means, okay, how many dollars? So for me, we need to talk about what we think we need to do or want to do, what we hope to achieve through doing those things, why we're doing them. And then figure out, okay, what does it look like to do that work and how much does it cost? I personally don't understand. It's backwards to me to say, oh, Brian, who always helps us with sort of a starting point for any given budget by, using the last year as a good indication of where we might go, pulling the 14,000 from last year and just going with it, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, we don't know what we're going to do or how it's going to cost. We don't know if it's going to cost more. We don't know if it's going to cost less. We don't know specifically what we're going to do. We do have that 1 through 11 from Dr. Effiam, which is a great starting point. And we have everything that we've learned and talked about. And so, we're farther ahead than we were, and that's great. But, I also am not clear, and I would love, some help from Brian and anyone else who's been around the block a little bit longer than I have in the budget process. When we approve the tentative budget various times, and then we eventually, make it more as we've talked about in the past, the idea of concrete slowly drying harder, and getting to a place where we can't change it once we've set it. What kind of formality is associated with voting right now to fund equity work? Is it more of a symbolic move and just issuing our sentiment that we, want to or don't want to do this work, and then what the work is and how much it costs is a separate piece? That's kind of how I view it. So if that's the case, I'm absolutely, in favor of moving forward in that direction. I'm just not totally clear what a vote of yes in this case means.
Right. Well, based on what you do tonight, Natalie and I, but mostly Natalie, has been talking to Dr. Effiam about an estimate of what that might cost us. So after tonight, we'll have a firmer number with some discussion with Dr. Effiam. And I don't know the legalities about it, but I would not vote on a firm number tonight because anything can change between now and September. September, when you pass the appropriation ordinance, when you pass it, then you're done. In December, you'll pass the levy ordinance, which tells you how much taxes you're going to collect. But September is the date. September board meeting date is the date where when you pass that levy or that appropriation ordinance, those numbers are firm. We have a budget meeting August 24th, and then you have a board meeting in September. And you have a board meeting in 2 days for budget discussion. So there's actually 3 dates to firm that number up.
Okay, Dr. Effiam, you had your hand up first, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I would say I would be incredibly uncomfortable handing down a budget number tonight. Are you all voting on that number? Mainly because it technically at the end of my number 2, my first number 2, my contract ceases with you all. And so until I know what you all decide to do with these 2 things and then can have a little further discussion about where we're going to go from there, I can't put any real numbers to it. And that would not be fair to you. I'm happy to engage in, at no charge, of course, your budget discussions and give you my thoughts and opinions about what items would cost and what you could realistically do. But throwing a number out there tonight, it would not be fair to you all.
And then I think it was Debbie's hand that was next.
I was just going to say, can't we, I don't know if we need to amend your motion, Matt, or can't we just make a motion that to continue the equity, with Dr. Effiam, to be decided at the budget? I mean, can't we just do a yes or no tonight, whether we want to continue, doing this work?
Yeah, Matt.
Sure. So that really was my intention. I think the vote tonight is to signal to everybody, staff and Dr. Effiam, that we as a board intended to move forward with this substantively. That $14,000 is a placeholder in the budget from what we spent last year. I think I agree with what Martha said, is we need to really buckle down on what that number is going to be, if it's going to go lower or higher, and what makes up the $14,000. But as a placeholder, I'm comfortable with it. And from what I'm hearing from the rest of the board, it seems like there is an intention that we mean to move forward with this work. And so that in between now and approving the final budget, we're signaling to everybody else that's the direction we want to move.
Okay, Debbie.
I was just going to say that that I agree, that I think that we just vote on a yes or no tonight. And I mean, because we haven't done the budget. So, and plus we need to get from Dr. Effiam what she suggests, specific, not specific, but, how, like, would it be a consultant? Would it be ongoing stuff? Would it be, we don't have that information, I don't think. So tonight is just you know, I feel like I'm really comfortable with just a yes or no to continue with Dr. Effiam. Or
Okay. And so in the,
I think Pat had his hand up.
oh, I'm sorry.
Let's vote.
Okay. Could Natalie, could you read the wording of Matt's this piece of the motion?
Yeah, so Commissioner Mitchell made a motion to continue funding equity work in the 2020-2021 budget.
Okay, so my last point of discussion, and it's not a huge deal, but I really like Dr. Effiam's wording in her report itself. Number 1 says board members vote to continue the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion work as a priority for the upcoming year. So to me, that's more about expressing that it's our intention to focus on those things, you know, equity work, diversity work, inclusion work as a priority for the upcoming year as our budget allows. So, you know, the wording I think of Matt's is fine. I prefer Dr. Effiam's wording. If everybody's okay with voting on the motion as it stands, that's fine with me as well. Does anybody have any additional issues or questions? Okay, I think we can move to a vote then, Natalie.
Okay. Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaines,
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, and then Matt, you said it was a 3-part. Did you you have a third part there?
Matt, you're on mute.
Sure, let me get back to the report. Dr. Effiam, the next step, was it regarding the Ready Committee?
Yes.
And
So the wording there is identify and formally appoint a racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, you know, READY as the acronym, committee. Without such a body, Ridgeville Park District will have no meaningful way to, 1, engage communities of color, 2, address racial equity issues that might arise, 3, make recommendations to the RPD board, and 4, ensure that equity goals are realized and sustainable. So that was point 2 of what she's asking us to move forward on.
I see it. So then I would move, Commissioner Mitchell would move to formally appoint the Racial Equity and Diversity and Inclusion Committee as a subcommittee of the Ridgeville Park District Board.
And this is Coyne. I second.
Okay, so then I think at this point, the discussion basically amounts to a period of nominating the actual members of the READY committee. Because Dr. Effiam's second piece after point 2 there was, it is my strong recommendation that nominations for the READY committee should be limited to board members and READY committee members who have completed the training. This is the group that has the fullest understanding of what equity will look like for the RPD. The board would, of course, make the final decision. And then, as we've already talked about, she also says, I recommend no more than 7 non-board members. And obviously with the Open Meetings Act, there can be no more than 2 board members. So that's already, you know, stuff we've gone over in the past, and it's in line with the Open Meetings Act. So moving forward, formalizing the committee via the method of nominating and voting on nominations. Is that correct, Dr. Effiam, as your recommendation?
That is my recommendation. Again, this is the body that has an understanding, has been through the training, has shown the commitment, and knows what it means to carry this long haul. So yes, absolutely, that's my recommendation.
Matt?
Could I suggest formally appointing the committee tonight and sending back to the READY committee the task of creating rules, bylaws, you know, term limits, all the ins and outs of the committee? I would trust a recommendation coming from Dr. Effiam and the READY committee.
And that is absolutely how that should work.
So do we nominate? Oops, sorry.
I think I was going to ask the same question as Pat. So do we have to nominate individually? Like each member has to be nominated and voted on?
My recommendation is that you do nominate individual. I couldn't see a reason why with the Ready Committee, you'd have to, unless there were more than 7, that you would have to then vote individually.
Oh, okay. So if I'm understanding Dr. Effiam correctly, it's her recommendation that the body that is allowed or, encouraged to nominate the committee members, that body of people includes everyone at this meeting, basically, who has completed training with Dr. Effiam. So the previous committee members and the board members are now in a position to make nominations. And I suppose you could nominate multiple people at once if that's how you would like to do it. And then I would think, Natalie, that maybe you keep track of the nominations. And then once everyone feels like they're finished nominating, I suppose we vote at that point on those members. Matt?
May I suggest, I have a pending motion to appoint the Ready Committee. If that went to a vote, I or anybody else could make a second motion to nominate the members of the Ready Committee. If I was to be that person, I would nominate the people who are currently make up the committee in one list. So the second motion would include all of the names of the committee.
Okay, I'm confused why we're voting to, it seems like we're doing that twice. Can you just clarify what the difference is there between
We're
those
doing two different things. And a board member could disagree with one but not the other. The first thing that we're doing is formally appointing a committee, a subcommittee of the board, the Ready Committee. Once that's established, if it is, then the next step would be to make nominations. And we're all pretty clear who those nominations are going to be. And then that goes to a vote. Once we have appointed the committee, established a committee and appointed the members, then I would be comfortable sending the bylaws, committee bylaws and rules back to that committee. So I think those two steps would be what we would do tonight, and then the committee would kind of get into the details moving forward.
Aiden, did you have a hand up?
I was just wondering if we can review who was originally the Ready Committee. Because now with everybody here, I'm not sure I remember which were the original people, like which board members and.
Natalie, I see your hand up. Were you going to answer her or did you?
Yeah, I think just to clarify what you're all saying is that Matt wants to move to formally appoint a Ready Committee. And then the second motion would be to go through the nomination process. So for example, I would nominate myself, I would accept my nomination, and then you would all vote to appoint me, right? So it's first establishing that we do intend to formalize a Ready Committee, and then the second thing is doing the nomination and the appointments.
Okay, I totally see that description that you just said, and that makes sense actually, because it's almost like when Dr. Effiam had 1 and 2, this nomination process is like point 3. It's like it is that third step that we're taking. Because if we all agree that we are appointing a committee, we can vote on that, sure. Then we go ahead and actually make those appointments by nomination. I guess I'm a little confused because when I was nominated for president of this board, for instance, it was a nomination, I accepted it, and then there was a vote. In this Ready Committee, if we are agreeing that we're nominating 2 board members to be members of that committee, are we going with a nomination, whichever one happens first, and we vote to approve? Or are we going to hear all possible nominations in the event there are more than 2 who get nominated? I'm not clear on but I think the motion has been made by Matt. So I think it's probably proper to just go ahead and vote on that and then figure out exactly how this nomination process goes as that second step. So do we have a motion and a second on that?
I'll second Matt's motion to appoint the Ready Committee. I mean, to
The-
formally approve the Ready Committee.
Did you have the wording, Natalie, of that motion?
Yes, and we did have a second.
Oh, we did, okay.
We did, yeah.
Okay. So we can go with a roll call then.
Okay. Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaines,
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt, I'm so sorry. Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
thank you. Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
So I'm sorry, Matt, were you planning to make an additional motion then? I wasn't clear if that was if we were waiting on that from you for the nomination or.
Thank you. Let me just, we're being informal. Can I nominate a list of the committee, of people that are already on the committee?
It's not that you can't, but in terms of the board actually having the final say on who gets onto that committee, it's a little bit hard to vote on a list because, you know, unless you're okay with every single member, you might not vote yes. And it just, I don't know. I'm a little confused how we form a committee with nominations. Perhaps we start with commissioners. We know we're limiting it to 2. And perhaps we do that as a first step, that we nominate just the commissioners and figure out who those 2 people are first.
All right. I nominate Commissioner Coyne and Commissioner Gaines to be board members on the Ready Committee.
This is Ken.
You're on mute, Danny.
It sounded like Dan was trying to talk.
Is everybody hearing that?
yeah, Debbie, you're on.
What?
There was some feedback. That was Coyne seconding the motion.
All right. So then, Commissioner Gaines, do you accept that nomination?
I actually wanted to nominate Debbie Braun for the Ready Committee. So now we're in a position where we have 3 commissioners nominated for a committee that has 2 positions.
I would second that motion to nominate Debbie and Matt and Martha for the Ready Committee.
Okay, so procedurally, if we're making motions here, you know, we had a motion first. I don't know how to do this. If we're doing it as a motion or if we're doing it as nominations. Natalie?
So I think what needs to happen is the nominations need to be made. You need to accept your nomination, and then the board has to vote on each one of those nominations.
Independently.
Only 2 of them, for the commissioners at least, can be voted into the committee. Correct?
I think that is how it goes because you can't really vote on the nomination until it's been accepted. So the nomination comes first, accepting the nominations comes second. In the event that we have more people nominated than spots open, then we are voting on individuals. Everybody who votes from the board needs to know that you can only vote for 2, basically.
So Commissioner Gaines, Commissioner Coyne, and Commissioner Braun have all been nominated. Do all 3 of you accept your nominations?
I do.
This is Gaines, I do.
This is Coyne, I do.
Okay.
Okay, so I think at this point we can make motions for votes. Is that kind of how you just envisioned it, Natalie? That somebody will make a motion on an independent nomination and we all vote on that and then move to the next one and move to the next one.
I guess.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I move to vote on the nomination of Debbie Braun to the Ready Committee.
Does that need a second?
Yeah, we'd need a second.
Second.
Okay, so that was Gaines made the motion and McCourt seconded, and we'll go to a roll call vote for approving the nomination of Debbie Braun to the Ready Committee.
Okay. Commissioner Braun,
Yes, I'm happy to say I would like to do that.
Commissioner Coyne,
No.
Commissioner Gaines,
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell.
No.
Okay.
And Natalie, do you want to remind us of how that vote went down? I think it's, you know, in terms of saying whether the motion passes or fails, we just need to have that vote count again.
Oh, okay. 3 voted in favor and 2 voted against, so the motion passes.
Okay. So Debbie is in one of those spots for the Ready Committee in terms of the spots available to commissioners. And
Make a motion to nominate Martha Gaines for the Ready Committee.
And this is Braun, I second it.
Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay. Roll call, right? Commissioner Braun,
Debbie, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
No.
Commissioner Gaines,
I'm sorry, we're voting on me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
okay, there were four votes in favor and 1 against, so the motion passes.
Okay, so the 2 commissioner spots have been filled, and I wonder if for the rest of the people, I wonder if we should do it list form because of the fact that there aren't 7 people in this body, as we've called it, of people who have been trained. There aren't 7 people who are non-commissioners. I'm sorry, there aren't more than 7 who could even be nominated. So we don't have that risk of voting on it and having a different, does that make any sense? So it's almost like we could pick, let's see. I think it's just 6. To answer Aiden's question from before, the people who participated who were non-commissioners were Elaine Siegel, Aiden Nowlin, Patrick Nowlin, J.C. Herman.
I'm going to remove Patrick from the list, though.
Okay. So then in terms of the people who would be in the position to accept a nomination, it's Aiden Nowlin, Elaine Siegel, J.C. Herman. And then we have not talked about Wes joining the committee, except sort of behind, you know, outside of meetings, because I think that came up after we met last. And it's been brought to my attention that Wes is interested in joining the committee. Is that correct, Wes?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so Wes is in that body of people that would be, you know, as per Dr. Effie's recommendations here, that we would be pulling from that group that includes J.C. Herman, Wes Shavers, Aiden Nowlin, Elaine Siegel, and not Patrick. So who am I forgetting that is a non-commissioner? Or is that it? Natalie, of course, Natalie. Okay, so, but that is it, right? Those 5. Okay, so yes, Pat.
I'll make a motion to nominate those 5 individuals.
I'll second it.
Okay, Debbie's got the second. And then before we go to a roll call vote, Is there any discussion or any issue with moving forward on that from anyone, committee or board member? Okay, so we'll go to a roll call vote then. Sorry, Wes. Wes, I see you.
Sorry, I have one question. So, can everyone hear me okay? So I do go back to school starting next week, but I figured that being on the equity board would give me a chance not only to kind of explore a lot of the things that I really haven't gotten a chance to explore and talk about, but also to help my community. And I know that as for now, due to current situation and circumstances, that meetings will be via Zoom. Now, in the case that, because I only have 2 semesters left before I can finally kick the can on my my bachelor's degree. In the case that, let's say it's my 2nd semester and we start moving to physical meetings, is there a way for me to electronically dial in, or will my lack of physical presence at the meetings going forward cause a problem for the equity board in the far future?
Wes, I would say that your voice is an incredible contribution. You know the committee, you know the community, you know RPD. Your being at a distance, I think, would not hurt us at all. In fact, I think that it will add to it.
Okay.
I agree fully, and I would actually have been worried that if and when you're, physically leaving, that you might be telling us, because I'm leaving, I'm not going to be able to serve anymore. I think if you're willing, physically here or not, it's my stance that I would love to have you for the longest period that you are comfortable joining us.
Thank you. Then you guys can go ahead and go to the vote. I'll mute myself now.
I have one question. Could we have it so that the equity committee has the opportunity to seek out other members? So if somebody else wants to join and shows an interest, or seeks us out and says, I am interested in becoming a member of this committee, I have ideas, could we then fill those other spots?
That would be the absolute goal, Aiden, for this, is we ideally want to get to 7 people and then another 7 in holding. And so absolutely.
I agree. As you all may recall, we had a survey put together by Natalie, I think, and that was to solicit people's interest in participating in equity stuff at various levels, including just being kept up to date, all the way, to the other end of that spectrum in terms of ultimate involvement, which was joining a committee. And so from that pool of people who responded to that survey, we're looking at those people right now. And given that we would love to shoot for 7 per Dr. Effiam's recommendation, I think absolutely we're now in a position of seeking out some additional members. And we can figure out with Dr. Effiam how she feels about the fact that those people won't have, participated in that particular training that already took place. But there are tons of people out in the world right now, and in our community, obviously more relevantly, who have done all kinds of trainings, even if they haven't done the one that we just did with Dr. Effiam. So I hope and believe that we will find additional people in the community interested in joining the Ready Committee. And so were there any other questions, ideas? Sorry, was that a hand, Dr. Effiam?
No.
Okay. Yes, Elaine.
I just had a quick point. I did miss the last session of the training. I had a professional commitment that I just had to make, and I want to apologize to the committee. It was unavoidable. I did listen in to the YouTube recording of the session, so I have reflected on that, given it a good deal of thought. I thought it was really, really wonderful, frankly, and very helpful for all of us to share what it was that we were thinking about and what we'd learned from the training. So I just wanted to thank you for that opportunity.
And Elaine, that's what part of what we want to do is begin to build that into a library, so that as new people come along, they can listen into those and get some of that training. But also for constituents, for park users, for small groups, we could use those. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, by the way, for catching up on the meeting on your own time. That's awesome. We all understand that things come up, so that's great that you watched it. Was that video? Was it pretty functional? You know, did it feel like when you were watching it, you could hear everyone basically the same way you would have if you had been on the Zoom? I'm just curious how that recording works.
Sorry.
It's on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, here we are. Yes, I thought it was very clear, and it was interesting to me because it was so immediate. And even though it was a recording and everybody looked like postage stamps lined up in a stamp album, you know, the dedication and the commitment and the kind of thought and reflection that people were engaged in, I thought that really came through. And I think that the idea of having a library for people, you know, from the community to look at, I think that's excellent. I think that it would be meaningful.
Great. So where were we? Were we still about to do roll call vote for the non-board member committee members? Okay.
Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
No.
Commissioner Gaines,
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
Agree.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Yes.
So that was 4 votes in favor of appointing these non-commissioner committee members and 1 against. So the motion passes.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm just going to view the agenda, right? So we were at receive and discuss recommendations for action still. And that's really all that's left technically on this meeting's agenda. I have one question for Dr. Effiam, just a point of clarity. I have a lot of questions about the report, but I think they're all things that relate to how we move forward. And so I think it makes sense maybe to have that be an additional piece where the committee can follow up with you and hopefully start to flesh out what that's going to look like. And just a reminder, sooner rather than later because of our budgeting purposes. So we need to know exactly what we want to try to do. And I love that we've got that 1 through 11, because if we can start to put some dollar signs by those once we flesh it out, what exactly they mean and how we do those things and what they cost, we may find that we're like, okay, well, you know, of those 11, these 5 are the highest priority and this is what we're going to do this year, something like that, you know. But I think that part of the process we can talk about later in case, you know, unless anyone else wants to talk about it. My point, just to wrap up the, you know, finality of your previous contract, is that we did plan to do the town hall meetings.
Yes.
Of course, the pandemic, you know, got in the way. That's not anyone's fault. But because that was an itemized element of what we were paying you for, my question is just, do you view the additional interviews that you conducted to have made up for that? Or do you view it to be something we'll deal with in the future and you just won't charge us because we've already paid for it? Or how do you view that piece in particular?
I never view any community engagement as additional. Anything we can do to engage the community at any point, and that will be built into everything that we do. And so when we can get to those, we'll get to those. But even with the survey, not one of us should be pleased with 27 responses. And so how do we develop a deeper, stronger survey that reaches even further into the community? So those are all pieces that are ongoing. And I know on paper, you've got to put a dollar sign next to them and say, you know, we want to have this done by July 1st. But realistically, this work does not allow for that work to not go on. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and at various points we talked about but didn't kind of get anywhere with the idea, I think because we were all hoping that at some point in the near future we'd be able to be in person again, and that not only hasn't happened, but it's probably not happening anytime soon. So I think at one point in time we sort of just had the town hall meetings on hold, hoping we'd do them in person. We did briefly talk about trying to facilitate a town hall meeting virtually, but I don't know about you guys. I'm not quite sure how many people Zoom can accommodate. And if it's a ton of people, you can't see each other's faces. It's done in that other format where, you know, a set of people are panelists and everybody else is just listening in. So I'm not sure it would work. You know, I'd love to be able to do it sooner rather than later, but not at the expense of getting out of it what we really hoped to get out of it from doing it in person. So, I mean, yes, I take your answer to be that engagement piece, even though it didn't happen that way at that time, that's still part of future work. I mean, it's really a lot of the future work, engagement period, outreach, yes, getting more people knowing that we're here, what we're doing, having more discussion. So I think we do have to brainstorm on how we can do that digitally, you know, through technology. And that'll just be another part of things we discuss moving forward. Does anyone else have questions about the report? Anything else they want to ask or discuss? Pat?
I just wanted to thank Dr. Effiam for the report and her 7 months of hard work for Ridgeville. I think it's really been beneficial for all of us, and I look forward to her, you know, continued involvement with us. I really appreciate her efforts.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, Pat. Thank you very much.
Debbie?
I'd like to say just ditto. I mean, it's amazing, and I'm so sure you're the right one to do it. Definitely. And I also feel really good about the report, and I hope that a lot of people listen to this, you know, because I think that it could clear up a lot of misinformation that's been out there and see what we're working on and what we're doing and what we have done and what hasn't been there and what has. So I really hope that a lot of people see this report, and I thank you.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Effiam, as well. And for me personally, so far, the greatest value has come from the trainings that we did with you and the awesome in-depth discussion that you helped facilitate. And I just hope that other organizations are paying attention and can try to do this if they haven't already. I think, you know, when we sought your help, many of us felt like we so desperately wanted to focus on these things, learn about these things, work on these things, and we did not know how. And I think a lot of people are in that boat. I don't fault them. I don't fault us, but I also don't think it's any kind of a letting somebody off the hook that you don't know how to do something. You got to figure it out. So that's why we sought your help. And I think we've just gotten so much of what we were looking for from you. And I look forward to working in the future as well.
Thank you.
Wes?
Okay. I just wanted to really just formally thank Dr. Effiam for really helping Ridgeville continue to move in the right direction. I've been with Ridgeville Park District since I was 9 years old, so it's not a long time, but you know, the 12 years have felt like an eternity to me. And while I never felt like there was anything strictly or directly wrong with Ridgeville as an organization, whether I was a camper or counselor, or I was helping printing documents for the board meeting, it's been a real treat as an intern to be able to actually kind of see how things happen behind the scenes and also start to see a lot of the discomfort I felt over the years start to be addressed in a very productive and a very thoughtful manner. So I just want to not only thank you, Dr. Effiam, but for everyone else for being able to, you know, make what for a lot of organizations feel like the impossible, at least somewhat possible. So.
It's if I can just say in closing, you know, I appreciate you all's gracious words and all of that. I must say that in my own time of reflection, this organization has probably been one of my gems. One that has come along much quicker than most organizations are able to come along. And it does not have to do with size. It really does have to do with commitment. And perhaps because of the sort of attack that you were under, you all were really committed, or the timing was just right. I can't figure out which, but give yourself a round of applause, because the work that you have done has been absolutely tremendous. And I've had colleagues from the surrounding community who have reached out to me and said, wow, what are you all doing down there? And I'm like, they're just on fire. And so I'm glad to see it. I'm thrilled. I couldn't have been more proud when the website went up, and the feedback we got from that, and we will continue to just add to that. And so let's just keep being committed to do new things. I mean, in my mind, I have just gained 10 or 12 more advocates who are serious about doing equity work and serious about making a change in the world. So thank you all for sticking to it. So make sure you give yourself a hand clap of applause.
All right, so unless anybody else, sorry, somebody talking? I thought I heard something. Okay. Unless anyone else wants to speak on anything or ask any questions, I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
And so that was Gaines and it's just like everything else, a roll call vote. Please, Natalie.
Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaines,
Yes.
Commissioner McCourt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Effiam. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night. I'll see many of you at the meeting on Thursday.
Okay, good night.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Betty.
Good night.